I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and given that it is the month of October and everything spooky is in fashion right now, I thought this would be a good time to look at Ghouls and Ghosts for Sega Genesis. Despite what some of you might be thinking right now, this actually is a case of Genesis does what Nintendo don't, because ports were released for the CPC, the Amiga, the ST, the Commodore 64, even ZX Spectrum, but it never came out on Nintendo or Super Nintendo. You might be thinking of the prequel, Ghosts and Goblins. This is the sequel, and this was in arcades first before it came to Mega Drive and Sega Genesis. You may also recognize this game from the TurboGrafx 16 Mini because it's called Daimakamura in the Japanese games section, not Ghouls and Ghosts, but it is the same game. Now sadly, I only have the cartridge and box, but let's not cry too many tears about me not having the instruction manual, because this cartridge goes for $40 loose, the game goes for $70 complete, and new it goes for the insane amount of $315. I don't agree with those kind of prices for this game. I certainly didn't pay that much for it myself, but I have no control over the market. 10-12 years ago, you used to be able to get a loose copy of this game for $5, and I got it well before that. I suspect there must be some hardcore Ghosts and Goblins series fans who are trying to complete a collection by having every single game in the series, and that has driven the prices up dramatically, much as they did when I was trying to complete my Mega Man collection and get every cartridge for Mega Man that had ever been released. Then every disc, then every handheld game. That you get the idea. When you get to be a completist, it gets to bog you down quite a bit because everybody that's going for the same thing wants the limited number of copies that are available, which is the perfect example of supply and demand. Not everything that's expensive is rare, and not everything that's rare is expensive. It is the combination of desirability and availability that actually sets the price point for things. Anyway, Ghouls and Ghosts is a ridiculously hard game. And that's not just me being terrible at it. That's me just being completely honest about it and saying, wow, it's tough. You get 2 hits. The first hit, you lose your armor. The second hit, you die. That's pretty much the standard formula for all of the games in this series. But if you don't memorize absolutely everything each time through, you're going to take 2 hits so quickly. You're dead before you know it. It's not a game you can survive without repeat rote memorization. If you've not played it for a few years, your playthrough is probably going to look just as bad as mine does right now. That doesn't make it a bad game. Doesn't make it a bad quality game. The graphics are very finely detailed, especially for an early era Sega Genesis game from the late 1980s. The soundtrack is, well, it's okay. It's slightly repetitive, but it's not bad in quality. I'm somewhat more nostalgic for the NES soundtrack, but that's not to say that the Genesis one isn't good. In fact, I probably spent more time listening to this one than the NES one, because I never owned an NES, but my friend Chris and I had a Sega Genesis in college. Big shout out to Sir Crunch. And there was actually a point where we played through the entirety of this game, including having to go back to the beginning and play through it the second time to get the true ending. That was a marathon gaming session. It helps that you get a lot of continues, so when you die, you can restart where you died, at least whatever the last checkpoint you reached is, but at the same time, it still required getting good, as they say, because just dying over and over again, you get nowhere even if you can continue. But once you get good, then you can hang on to whichever weapon that you want. And if you collect the gold armor, you can power up your weapon and you can make much more progress in a much more efficient amount of time. Time is not on your side either because, as you can see, you have a clock ticking down in the upper right hand corner. So if you want to be trepidatious and make cautious steps toward your goals, you're probably not going to get to the goal before you run out of time. You have to carefully balance between moving quickly enough to stay ahead of the clock, but not moving so quickly that you run into instant death like I just did right there. It's it's one of those things where it seems like I'm dogging on the game, but I want to be clear that I'm not knocking anything about Ghosts and Goblins, Ghouls and Ghosts, Super Ghosts and Goblins, any of the games in this series. They are hard, but they are not hard in a way that I feel should be an impediment to playing them. It's like saying the Ninja Gaiden games are hard. Yes, they are. Should you play them? Yes, you should. It doesn't make them bad games. It makes them games with a learning curve that makes you play them again and again and get a little better each time. And each time you get a little bit better, you enjoy it more. So even when you die, you still want to come back and do it some more. It reinforces itself upon you and makes you feel like it's worth the effort you're putting into it. It's a constant feedback reward system that when you get better and you make progress, it triggers those endorphins in your brain that you feel that sense of satisfaction like, I did this well. I made more progress than I did the time before. Now I can make even more progress this time and so on. And I'm just getting better and better. And I'm having more fun because I'm making more progress and achieving more goals and taking out more enemies and getting to further areas and exploring more things and finding more hidden treasures. You just constantly get that positive reinforcement when you're playing a game like this. So hard isn't bad. What's bad is when a game is not only hard, but the controls are unresponsive or slippery or floaty, and the enemy attacks are too overwhelming to overcome, even if you had perfectly tight controls, and the hitboxes are terrible, so things take you out even when they're nowhere near you, or you hit things and they don't register the hits. That's a bad game. None of these things are true of Ghouls and Ghosts. Everything works the way it's supposed to, and you get better over time. Like, for example, there was a magic attack there from one of those treasure chests, and normally if it hits you, it turns you into a helpless duck. But I actually ducked under the duck spell, and that's only something you would do with repeated practice to time it to know when it's coming at you that you can actually get out of the way instead of being hit by it. And knowing which path you want to take, whether to go up or down, that's only something you would know from repeated trials. Again, that's what's rewarding about Ghouls and Ghosts, is you learn from it, you get better at it, you make more progress in it. And now I've actually reached a boss stage, or boss monster, I guess, a level boss, area boss of all bosses. Let's quote Slim Thug here. He the boss of the North. He the mother effing boss. Yeah, so this guy, you have to hit him in the head with your lance, or whatever other weapon you might have. And if you hit him enough times, he goes down, but you have to avoid his fireball attacks, and you have to avoid getting cornered by him. And you just have to... Timing is everything. You just have to time it out And once you get the timing down, you can take him down. And this probably won't be the time I take him down. I think it took me a few more tries, but I was starting to get into a rhythm here. Not quite that time, though. I just lost all my armor and turned into a pile of bones, but Arthur will go forth dauntlessly and make rapid progress. I think that's the other reason that sometimes the Ghosts and Goblins series gets a bad rap, is because of the comical English translation in the very first game from Japanese to English, but to me, that's actually charming as opposed to awful. I know it makes great cannon fodder for stuff like Angry Video Game Nerd, and let's not make any mistake about it, it was a very bad translation, but would it be so memorable if it was good, if it was normal, if it read like proper English sentences? No, you wouldn't care about it. You wouldn't think, go forth dauntlessly, make rapid progress. You wouldn't remember that. It wouldn't stick with you. It's just like the infamous Castlevania, "What is a man?" speech. Like, if that was any good, would we care? It can't be. That's what makes it great. Someone set us up the bomb. Zig for great justice. These things stick with us over time. Perfect translations don't necessarily achieve the effect. You spoony bard! Who cares if that's actually what the translator really meant? It's better because it's memorable. It becomes its own catchphrase. It becomes part of the lore of these games. You want things like that to make an impression on you, to stick with you, that gives you that value when you come back to them later, that you remember these things from childhood and go, oh yeah, that's that game with that really wacky translation that didn't make any sense, and I didn't understand why it was so bad as a kid because I didn't know anything about localization or Japanese to English or games being ported. I just played games, and games were weird, and that was part of the weirdness of video games. And those things will stick with you for a lifetime. Even if you start playing them in your later age, you're not necessarily going to have those fond, nostalgic childhood memories, but they're still going to make an impression on you that will stick with you just the same, much more so than if everything was done perfectly. Perfection is not a mark of greatness. Memorability itself is not necessarily a mark of greatness either, because things can be memorable for being bad. Take Mighty Number 9, for example. Pizza explosion, anyone? So, it's got to be the right combination of factors. It's got to be fun to play. It's got to be memorable. It's got to be challenging, but not too challenging. And it's got to have a theme that will stick with you and keep a place in your heart. And I would say Ghosts and Goblins, Ghouls and Ghosts, Super Ghosts and Goblins all do that. These games in this series, because of the undead monsters and the horrifying beasts and the devil, which himself got spun off into a series of games, Gargoyle's Quest, Demon Crest, and the like. This series has lived on through the decades and inspired many similar games with similar themes like Battle Princess Madeline, so we cannot discount the value that is to be gained from a series like Ghosts and Goblins and sequels like Ghouls and Ghosts. They truly have stood the test of time as some of the greatest platforming games, even if they are also notoriously some of the hardest. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Thanks for watching.